Awesome. So my name is Allison Price, and I'm with the OpenStack Foundation. We're going to talk about a diversity report that Intel and Bitergia worked on together. Some of the stats coming out of that, but we're also going to do a super user article about all of the findings. We picked a few today just to kind of go through as discussion points, but I'm also really interested in hearing y'all's perspectives. I know there's not many people here, so feel free to interject. And as we ask the questions, then y'all can give your perspectives as well. But don't have to wait till the end necessarily to do question and answer officially. So to get things started, I was going to have everyone introduce themselves and talk about a barrier that they've had in overcoming diversity and what they've done to overcome that barrier.
Well, there was a surprise question. My name is Gary Kevorkian. I'm with Cisco as an event manager for them. I'm also the organizer of the OpenStack LA user group. I would probably say that as opposed to answering the question, what barrier have I found, I'll say that my barrier is ones that I'm trying to knock down. And that is getting more people from diverse backgrounds involved, starting at my level with the user group and hoping that I don't know, is there something called trickle up? that trickles up through that trickles up through the community. I see a lot of progress being made over the last couple of years within OpenStack and other communities that I'm involved in, and just hope that it continues.
Well, hello everybody. My name is Victoria Martinez de la Cruz. I'm a software engineer at Red Hat, and I'm also coordinator for the Outreachy internships in OpenStack. I have been doing that for 4 years already, so I'm really glad about that. And also very proud member of Line of Chicks Argentina. It's a community that aims to bring more women in open source in my region, which is the area I think I have more power to do things. So that's the area I'm covering right now, and I hope great things from there. And perhaps one of the biggest barriers I have to face on diversity is language. In tech, everything is in English, and whereas it's easier, we get used to read and to write in English in college when you're studying. It's harder for you to speak and to actually, have these kind of conversations with native speakers. So that was perhaps one of the biggest barriers for me.
Hi everyone, my name is Sheila Saby and I am representing Comcast. I currently live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I work as a community leader for open source. I started working in OpenStack back in 2014 around the Hong Kong summit. That was my first involvement, and since then I've been a part of the user committee, and now I'm an OpenStack ambassador. I started the Northern Virginia OpenStack user group, big advocate, and I love this community. One of the barriers that I've had in tech has been kind of being the only woman on my team and not being able to fit in with the rest of the group because I wasn't, going to go out to beers or bowling or to the gun range with the team. So I constantly felt, left out or, unable to click or unable to get involved in different activities. So felt like, the bonding sessions were going on while I was not able to join. So since then, things have changed. We have many women on our team, and we're consistently looking to add more women. And so that's a barrier that's constantly being broken down, and hope that, will continue to change.
Hi, I'm Melissa Evers Hood, and I work at Intel, and I'm the Director of Engineering for our open source engagements in cloud software. A lot of things came to mind when you asked that question, but I think one of the things that I've been encountering is being asked to lead organizations that are lacking diversity, and having to confront folks about their implicit bias. When I manage a team that's 2% diverse, 4% diverse, and they're like, we don't have any bias issues, and you're like, okay, let's talk about that. And so that's been one of the things that I think has been a bit of a surprise for me recently is having to engage in that conversation, that this is not mature enough, that we actually have to directly speak to it and put it in people's faces.
So like I mentioned, there's a report that was just released around gender diversity in particular in the OpenStack community. And here are some of the stats that they pulled. And I actually added one for Sydney since we're here this week. So we've gradually seen the overall attendance for women at the summit go up. And this summit is the highest percentage we've ever had of women at an OpenStack summit, which is really exciting. I think my first summit was in Atlanta and it was 9%. So just kind of seeing that kind of representation increase over time is a really great sign. But we also, for the first time, pulled percentage of speakers. So I'm interested, 14 and 12%, we're still pulling for Sydney, but kind of the panel's perspective on, not necessarily even tied to the summit, but, getting diverse opinions in user groups. Sheila's an ambassador as well, and different kind of meetups, and why you think that's important to have that diverse representation of ideas and people sharing their thoughts.
For me, again, a lot of my perspective in my answers are going to come from running my user group and what it takes to get that diverse group of users. It comes a lot from what you do as an organizer, how you pick your presenters. We always look at any options for people who are kind of come in to present to my group. I recently brought on a co-organizer. Her name's Jessica Orozco from Rackspace, so she's come on. That has helped a lot in itself by letting people know that this is going to be a diverse organization or a diverse group of people. We're not the typical group of people that you might expect to see at a user group. We do strive for diversity. I think this is sort of jumping ahead maybe in one of the answers to a question that you're going to ask coming up, but one of the things that we talked about on a phone call as we prepped for this panel was that I kind of think that the lack of diversity actually becomes a barrier to diversity, in the sense that, it sounds kind of cliched and it sounds like an easy thing to say, and you go, oh, well, that was a great thing, thanks, let's move on. But it seems like this sort of blurry wall that people aren't willing to cross over and say, that looks like a good group I'd like to go to, but I still don't know that I'm going to feel comfortable there. And I think as we get deeper into the conversation, I'll talk about some of the things that we do within our group to try to, sort of foster that feeling that people are going to, be comfortable at our group.
So as Gary mentioned, I think it's really important to have a face representing the user group that is diverse. Even in the OpenStack Northern Virginia user group, I'm an organizer and I have a co-organizer who's also a woman. And we have women that show up. So I don't know if it's because, they see someone, they feel comfortable, that, there are other women there, but we do have them show up. And we also actively look for female speakers or different speakers, and just look for people who have different experiences and that we know that have spoken at different places that are great. And we invite them and have them come and make sure that, they feel welcome and that the users feel welcome.
Yeah, I kind of feel related with that. And part of what you have been mentioning, I have seen that in our community in Argentina for Linux Checks, in which we started being just two ladies, Cynthia, my friend, and myself. And we will have people like being super happy of we actually doing that effort and saying, okay, yes, I see what you are trying to do. I like that there is some women representing, open source technologies. But we also got people saying that why you need that, why you are segregating. You don't need, your own community in order to participate in tech. So we had many detractors. But after 2 years of having this community, we noticed that we have more people that has no background on tech whatsoever or in open source that are actually reaching us to ask us, like, hey, how can I make it? How can I do exactly what you are doing? How can I give my first step? So it's like, okay, it's working somehow. I mean, yeah, those instructors that were saying why you're doing this actually are getting our response by actually seeing the community grow.
Awesome. So one of the other stats the report talked about is OpenStack governance. So looking at the board of directors and the technical committee, we've seen gradual increases as the technical committee actually just elected 2 women in the last cycle. I think it was earlier or last month. The user committee, Sheila was was our 20% last time, but we've actually had constructive conversations at the Open Source Summit, Diversity Empowerment Summit about how we can, use OpenStack as an example. And the user committee actually came up in particular, and people are very engaged and interested in running to, represent women on the user committee, so that perspective is also included. Ambassadors are at 21%, and then PTLs are 3%. But I'm interested, looking at even just beyond governance and looking at contributors and both operators and developers. What do you think we could be doing or should be doing or are currently doing that can, foster more diversity in terms of gender and, like you talked about, with geographical distribution as well, in particular mentoring with Outreachy?
Anybody want to grab this one?
I'm thinking about it.
Are you thinking about it?
I have one line.
Okay.
So again, I'll go back to what I said about reaching out. Like with the user committee, I can think of maybe 3 or 4 people right this moment that I think would be a great fit for the user committee. And I feel bad that I didn't even reach out to them when, nominations were happening or when, during the election period. So I think reaching out and being a sponsor is great. And people have done that for me too, even with the OpenStack community. So we should continue that trend. If you know people that are diverse that you think would be a great fit for certain roles, give them a holler and let them know.
I would also say, you mentioned you knew 3 people you thought would be great. There are a lot of people that think they'll be great and that don't have the courage to raise their hand. And it may be that they don't feel like they know where to go. And I think that, being emboldened to start having that conversation and putting your name out there and saying, okay, maybe not next year or this year, but how do I position myself for next year, and what do I need to be doing, and how do I get engaged? And the people you see here represented are all people who are more than happy to help you on that journey. And I think that additionally, looking at the folks that you do have trusting relationships with and asking them for help as well is a really good way to look for those sponsors and to advance these numbers even further.
I have thought about it now. So one thing that has been my concern is that, like, diversity is, in general, we are talking about numbers like 10%, 15%. And if we want to have people taking leadership positions, we are only counting on that 15%. So it's that really small number of people. So sometimes that weight always falls in the shoulders, and it's hard. So it's like, I think this, like, in order to change this number, we have to act in 2 different ways. Encouraging more people to actually get involved in the community first, so there is more diversity and there is more people willing to actually take these leader positions. And as Dave mentioned, which is, I think, is very important, is to actually, motivate people, minorities that are in the community already, and we know that they have a really strong potential to actually, give the step forward and take those positions, because some of them may not be taking an action because, as they are minorities, they don't feel confident they can do it. So actually, being there and saying to them, you can do it, and if you need any help, I'm here for you as well, actually it's very helpful. And I think that will change a lot.
Awesome. So kind of reflecting on your organization or kind of your past and your career, what initiatives have you seen that are successful in increasing diversity and motivating people to not only be willing to speak up or stand up, but also be an ambassador for someone else to, help them stand up when, it's a little bit harder to do so because they're not as represented in the organization or community?
Is this where I get to give my shout out?
This is where you get to give your
Okay,
shout out.
all right. Okay, great. I'll get into a specific example in a second, but we joked about this on one of our prep calls for this, and I'm very sincere about what I'm about to say. I think the OpenStack Foundation deserves a lot of credit for making this a big deal, and it is a big deal. And we're not going to turn the ship on a dime, and I think everybody kind of needs to accept that. But we're seeing progress. We're seeing progress in the numbers, and I think specifically within OpenStack, I think that the fact that they make this such a focus. I was a track chair for the community track, and that's not why this panel got selected. I was actually asked to be on the panel because someone couldn't make the trip, and I filled in for them. But knowing the number of talks that were submitted about diversity for the track chairs to review within the community track in itself was a very positive sign. I think I tried to do the math quick in my head a little while ago. I think almost 20 to 25% of the talks that were submitted to the community track were about diversity. So that says a lot. And the fact that the OpenStack makes it important, I think, is something that they should be recognized for. A specific example would be, I think, almost sort of going back to the last question, was finding people who are looking for help and setting them up and teaming them up with the right people within, for example, within, again, the context of my user group. I know of 2 people who started joining my group without jobs, had some skills, and over the course of the last 2 years, both are employed, both women, developers working in OpenStack with very, very successful. One took a chance, just went to the Tokyo Summit, had no idea what OpenStack was. So she said, "What should I do?" And I said, "Well, the summit is a great example of what, of where you can go to learn about this stuff." And she said, "Well, when's the next one?" I said, "Well, it's in Tokyo." And she committed the money, went, learned, got aggressive about it, and is now an engineer. I wish I could remember the company she's working for, but that happened twice within our group where we just, encouraged. And, she's also sort of struck up friendships with some of the other members of the group. They've encouraged her, they've mentored her. And it makes a big difference just to know that those people are out there.
Yeah, that's something that I also want to highlight from the OpenStack Foundation, and it is not only about sessions like this in which we can have these kind of conversations, but actually taking care of things like the travel support program, in which all the overreaching internships we have in this round had the chance to apply and to attend. And I saw them earlier today, and they were so happy, and they were so excited, and they were talking with companies so they could actually get a job and continue contributing to OpenStack. And those things really make a difference. Also making this place safe for them to actually, come here and to, take the most of it. So I think that's great.
Yeah, definitely a big shout out to the OpenStack Foundation. I think they're doing something right. The numbers are increasing. I think there was a heavy focus on diversity from as soon as I joined, I think 3 or 4 years ago. So thank you for that. Yeah, and then the same thing with the sponsorship. I learned how to, in my career, how to support other women from a woman that was supporting me. So it was my director who brought me onto the team. I was working on Microsoft Exchange before I came over to OpenStack, and she said, "You're going to learn. You will learn. It's okay." And so I came on board, and my first experience with OpenStack was just going to Hong Kong. I said, "Okay, we're going to build this cloud. Can I go to Hong Kong, by the way, since that's where it's happening?" And I thought the answer would be no way, and it was maybe. And so, a couple of weeks later, I was booking my ticket. It's really exciting, and having somebody support me, they were a role model and they showed me the way. And so now I do the same thing for junior engineers who come on board. I show them the light. I say, hey, this is what you need to do. This, I mentor them and guide them. And I still have people above me that are also mentoring me and guiding me, and they're further out in their careers. And I think it's really, really important for us to support each other and help each other grow.
So one of the things you asked a question about, what can companies do in company programs, that I think is really interesting. So Intel has taken really aggressive representation goals, and we've been very public about that. And we should be at market representation by the end of 2019, and we'll be the first tech company to do so. But one of the things that we've learned through that experience is there's been a lot of resentment in the population that's been created by these programs. And so one of the new things that we're doing, which I think is really fascinating, is we're doing inclusion training and to create inclusive leaders, but we're doing it split by gender. So we're having intact female groups and intact male groups. And the girls are like, why are we having this conversation alone? Like, seriously, if we want to create an inclusive environment, we need to be having this conversation together. But what they found in the focus groups that they did beforehand was the men have not been having this conversation. The men have been seeing the women's groups and seeing the employee resource groups and seeing the diversity initiatives and seeing all of this, but they have not had a safe space to have this conversation in a way that's safe for them. And so this initial implementation is, the men have men groups by themselves, and it's kind of totally makes you go, huh? But it's been a really, really helpful way of giving folks a safe space to say the things that they've been thinking that if they would not feel comfortable saying if there was a woman in the room, and putting it on the table and having it out. And that's been a really positive thing for moving the conversation forward.
I want to add to that from the Red Hat perspective. I don't know.
No, you just finished.
All right, sorry.
No, I'm going to tell anyways.
So it's noted to mention that the effort that it's being done at Intel. I saw something at Red Hat that actually was like, I was really proud about that. That actually there has been some services in order to ask all employees, not only women, not only the minorities, so what they can do in order to change things. And those had been conducted for several weeks in order to enhance how women are being included or how minorities are included in Red Hat. And those numbers has been being published internally, so everybody can actually understand how big this is and how actually, everybody can help in order to change it. So that's something that I think that could be done as well in any community, in any company, in order to actually visualize this real situation for each company organization.
Now we go back to the question?
Yeah.
So it kind of goes back to the point of reaching out to people. So reaching out to people is great. If we know who we want to reach out to, it's awesome. It always works. But I'm wondering, especially from the technical community side, because that's where I'm coming from, and do we have the right channels for people to reach us and say, I feel excluded, or I think we should do better on this kind of thing? Because reaching out to people assumes that we know who we have to reach to, right? Assumes that we know all the kind of diverse groups that there could be. And I would argue that we don't know that, right? There's cultural diversity. I've written about it. There's cultural diversity, time zone diversity, language diversity, gender diversity. There's a whole bunch of different groups that I don't think we actually know them all, and I don't think we know what groups we have in our community. So I'm wondering if we have those channels, and if we do, I'm asking do those channels actually work pretty well? Are we getting people, are people actually reaching to us? And if we don't have them, well, should we build them and actually, market those and make sure that people know that those channels exist, and they should, if they feel excluded, if they feel like they're a minority and they need to, we need to fix something for them to feel comfortable in the community, then at least we know that and we can start acting on that.
So I actually think that's really interesting because I was telling them before, right before this session, I went to the financial services team launch, and it was about 30 people from China, and they started the session in Chinese, and Alan Clark and I sat there next to each other, and we're like, we had no idea what they were saying, and someone started translating for us, and one of the topics that it came to was channels. It was, how do we bridge the, cultural divide of what channels we use versus what channels the rest of the community uses to have actual productive conversations. To actually move this group forward and these use cases forward. And so that's actually a challenge they're facing right now is IRC right? Is the mailing list? Like, how are we gonna do phone calls? And, it was interesting to kind of watch them kind of work through those channels too. And it is a problem. And it's something that we are looking at other open source communities too. But I'm interested if anyone else has any perspectives on like what channels could maybe you've seen be successful in this kind of overcoming, especially Victoria, you mentioned, time zone and, not.
Even before that, and I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
Before we even discuss whether email, phone, or IRC is the right thing, is that we have a group of people that will receive those messages. Yeah. It doesn't really matter where they come from. It's like, do we have a group of people that we can say, if you feel excluded, go and talk to these people. Like, make sure you communicate somehow. and I know some people that feel excluded don't feel the courage to actually say it, but we gotta start somewhere, right?
Yeah, that's. We were just talking about that today during the Women of OpenStack luncheon. There used to be a diversity working group, and I'm not sure that it's been very active recently. And so we had a couple people who mentioned that they might want to get that started back up, just because we're seeing a lot of, this is a hot topic right now, and we really want to work on getting things moving quicker. And so thank you so much for bringing that up. Now I'm going to go ahead and follow through and talk to the people I talk, and we'll see if we can get that started because people do need a way. I know we have a code of conduct, but is that really going to address any diversity issues all the time? Maybe not. Anything?
Well, and the code of conduct is a static document, and it doesn't mean that people read it. It doesn't mean that people follow it. And so trying to figure out how do you have corrective action, and not in a disciplinary way, but in a, okay, let's have a conversation. This happened. I just as an example, yesterday I had 4 separate people approach me and tell me I was beautiful. In what world does that something you say at a technology conference, right? I was shocked, and I'm like, I felt like I was flashback 20 years in terms of gender in the workplace. I was like, what? Like, thank you. I mean, it was so odd. So yeah, I think, it's not in the code of conduct that you shouldn't comment on people's appearance, but, or maybe it is, I don't know. But I think there needs to be some kind of engagement where you can be able to say to people politely and nicely, hey, that's not appropriate. Yeah.
So I actually came forward for a channel topic.
Okay.
But I'll talk to the code of conduct one because I should use the mic. There was a really cool conference in the US, I think last year. I can't remember its exact name, but it was like Diversity Inclusion Conference. And it was all about that. And one of the things they did at the conference was they got their code of conduct and they actually had it on the walls. They used lots of imagery and lots of little messages, and it was everywhere. You couldn't dodge the code of conduct. It was everywhere. It was amazing. And one of the things I'm finding with this conference is visually there's very little. I'm lucky to find rooms. I'm really having to work to find rooms. So I think with the code of conduct there's little things you can do to really reinforce it, not just have it on your phone. Yeah. So the reason I came down was the channel conversation. So I was in the session at lunchtime where we were talking about, should it be a phone call or should it be IRC, and is that going to be more inclusive or less inclusive of tech and non-tech people? And so I just want to relate a story from when I used to work in Sun Microsystems, and I was actually asked to run a team across multiple countries. So I had one person in Thailand, one person in Singapore, had 2 people in Japan, and I was based in Australia. And we decided to use, it was Jabber back then, so we're using instant messaging, trying to do the chat thing. And I actually rang to the Japanese office at the same time because I speak Japanese, and I actually was helping them join into the conversation. So I don't think it's a case of one thing or the other thing. You actually need to complement all the different things, because I think we've got a global context, and we simply can't lock ourselves into one or the other. It needs to be this sort of multimedia type thing. And I actually think it's not just choosing the medium, it's also choosing the message and having ambassadors and champions there to actually help the people who need to navigate through that.
But I think, to your point, the issue is not the medium. Yeah. It's not the medium or the message, it's the audience.
You're right. So one thing I wanted to do is so one of my problems every time we talk about diversity, not saying we in the OpenStack community in general, the tech industry, is that we always assume that we know everything about diversity. And I have a very huge problem with that.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I would like to change is I don't, even if we create a diversity working group, it's I don't want this group to be the group that will teach OpenStack how to be diverse. I want this group to be receptive, not only teach OpenStack how to be diverse, of course, but also be receptive and be able to learn how to be diverse, right? Yeah. Because there's a lot of other information out there that we just don't know. We gotta admit that we are ignorant in these kind of topics. Yeah. And the moment we believe that we know everything about it, that's the moment we stop being diverse. Right. And we close the doors for a whole bunch of other people around the world.
No, I agree. Beth, I can see Beth has something. Yeah, all right, it's Beth again.
So I know I'm all for diversity, of course, and the numbers are pretty dismal, though they're better in OpenStack than they're in Linux. But the other elephant in the room is that we're not actually very diverse, because there's a lot of Indians and there's a lot of Chinese people in Asia, and in the US it's mostly Indians and whites. And so there's big gaps in, it's not really a globally diverse community. And we really need to reach out, and you mentioned the language barrier. I was really offended when we went to Hong Kong. One of the requirements if you were going to speak at the Hong Kong summit is you had to speak English, and that really bothered me. Because I listened to a couple of the sessions where the people who were speaking clearly didn't really speak English, and they were really struggling. And why couldn't we have a translator? Particularly for the keynotes and some of the other key things. There are ways to do it. I've done conferences where we had simultaneous translations. I know that's very expensive, but there are other ways to do it where you don't necessarily, just by saying you have to speak English, we're already excluding a whole lot of people. Maybe halfway.
Yep. I don't know, have we gone off the rails?
No, it's a discussion. Yeah, this is what it should be. And I think so. We have less than 10 minutes, so I'm interested if anyone else has questions or things that they've seen in other open source communities that have worked particularly well, whether it's any kind of diversity initiatives that have been successful in increasing representation of the people that are actually involved in the community.
So just as an extension to what Beth was just mentioning, it kind of seems a bit crazy that we're a tech industry and we can't solve the language barrier problem. And I know you mentioned simultaneous translation, and there's those cool new headsets that translate instantly, and I think surely we can make that cheap enough to be accessible at conferences and things. And surely we can have instant messaging that you write in whatever language you speak, and the person who receives it gets it in whatever language they speak. It seems a bit silly that the whole tech industry is facing the same problem and we haven't been able to solve it.
Google Translate has solved the problem.
Exactly, and we just haven't kind of used it to solve our problem now, the diversity problem.
I can tell you that the Italians, I don't know Italians do it, because I've done a couple conferences in
And
Italy.
have people sit there with the earphones and
Alibaba does it.
they do it for the key languages.
Do you know how expensive they are?
When you have actual people doing it, it's actually really expensive. But if you use like Google Translate, it's not perfect, so automated stuff, it's much less.
It's kind of free.
It's not ideal, but you know, at least
It's not perfect, it's not perfect.
And I think I saw it in a corporate setting, so.
Well, and I think so. The last summit I think that we did simultaneous translation was, I guess, Tokyo. And then Berlin is coming up, and we do want to take things like that into consideration. So I do appreciate. Well, but you know, that's something that we definitely want to make an inclusive environment, especially like we went to a lot of the OpenStack days in Asia, and you know, you kind of see it from a different perspective when you kind of go and you see, you know, the challenges that people must be feeling when they come to our summits and they may not speak the native language. And it was very interesting to be in that kind of environment and see. So it's definitely something we'll think about as we kind of go to these different locations and make things more accessible for the people who are active in the community.
Now, let me ask, when you went to OpenStack Days in China or Taipei or wherever it was, did you feel to a certain extent excluded because you couldn't take part in the conversations that 95% of the people who were there were having?
I didn't feel excluded. I felt, you know, people were very welcoming and understanding, and they wanted to, you know, they spoke English as best as they could, and we used Google Translate on our phones, and they did simultaneous translation, and it was more about, you know, for the sessions that weren't translated, you find the person afterwards, and they know someone who speaks English, and they were very accommodating in that kind of fact, and I think it's something that it's hard for us sometimes to learn, but, you know, going into that kind of environment and seeing it, yeah, they definitely, you know, you feel almost awkward at first,
right.
But you know, you find ways to, you know, make it a little bit easier, and they were all very accommodating, and you know, you found ways to.
It's sort of like you almost sort of force yourself to feel what it's like to be on the other side of that diversity discussion and say, oh my God, now all of a sudden I'm in the minority, and how do I solve that problem?
Yeah.
There's one
Yeah.
thing I'd like to mention before we end. I was at an event last night, and we were talking to some of the women that were there, and we were talking about, you know, kind of the context of Me Too, and you know, the hashtag Me Too, and you know, universally, every woman in the circle that we were talking with had experienced some form of harassment. Most times, it was fairly explicit and sexual in nature, and that was a normative experience across all of the folks that we were talking with. And I think, and while that is our reality today, unfortunately, that it is so pervasive even still today, I think the call to action for all of us is to try to stand up when we see it happening. You know, the community is on is on IRC, right? It happens in a lot of ways, and some are overt, some are covert, but I think in the context of this increased awareness, we all have an obligation to name it and to stand up for those who are being marginalized, and take risks, because it's scary sometimes to do that.
Awesome. I think that's actually all the time that we have. So I think I have some time afterwards. We can stick around, but I do want to continue these conversations, especially some of the ones we were talking about, Flavio. But yeah, thank you.